Okay, so I've changed the throttle position sensor, the map sensor. I've checked that all my injection connectors are all okay, they're receiving a pulse. So I'm hoping that the information that the ECM gets, which is basically when it's trying to start, it's looking for coolant temperature, it's looking for throttle position, and it's looking for the map sensor. They're the three main ones that it's using data for to know how to start the engine, how rich the mixture of air and fuel for it. I'm hoping that I've found it. I've also got invested in the Easy Connect, the Volvo Penta little system that plugs into the diagnostics. It's fairly limited diagnostics, but I've got it working on my iPhone. I know that one of the things that the ECM needs when starting it and cranking the engine is it needs to see the RPM, it needs to see the crank sensor, and I know that's okay because one of the things that I get on the diagnostic display here, when I'm cranking her over, I can see the RPM. So I've not interfered with that at all, because if I'm seeing it on my smartphone, my assumption is I'm seeing what the ECM's seeing, so it's seeing the engine cranking over. So hopefully it's getting the right data, and we'll give it a go. The other thing I forgot to mention, it also looks at the coolant temperature. Again, I can see that on my diagnostics on my iPhone. So again, I can see the crank sensor, I can see an RPM. When I put the ignition on, I can see a coolant temperature. So I'm assuming that those two bits of information are going to the ECM. I'm seeing the ECM, so I'm assuming they're all right. So this is why I've changed the throttle position sensor and the map sensor. And hopefully we'll see what happens when I turn her over. Well, there we go, she fired up. She ran very lumpy, but it's the longest she's ran, but that's probably because I dried everything out. All the plugs were all dry and cleaned up. I was checking the diagnostics on my phone. I wish I'd filmed that, so I'm going to get her to start again, then I'm going to film what the diagnostics are. So same symptoms, so I'm back to putting more fuel in than the engine needs. That's what it seems to sound like. I'm going to pull the plugs out now and have a look and see if they're wet with fuel. If they are, then there's too much fuel going in, and that's my problem. I don't know what's causing it or how to solve it yet, but let's pull the plugs and see where we are. Okay, so what I've done now is I took all the plugs out, and they weren't overly wet, but they were wet with fuel and they'd gone very black again. So I've dried them. I used a blowtorch, got them nice and hot, made sure they weren't wet, just cleaned up the electrodes again. I've just put the spark plugs back in. One thing I have done is the fuel pressure regulator. Looks fine. It's the one with the screen on. Volvo recommend all way back that you change the screen to an E-clip. I bought another pressure regulator and put the E-clip on it. I'm not very happy with how the E-clip fits. I guess it's supposed to spin very freely. It's sort of okay. I've actually fitted it because what I want to see is one of the reasons that you could be maybe everything's alright, the ECM's telling the injectors what to do and they're doing what they need to do, but if the fuel pressure is too high, you're actually putting too much fuel in. So I've changed the fuel pressure regulator to this one with the E-clip. I'm not going to start it yet, but I'm just going to switch it on and just see what my high pressure reading is, and see if it's dropped, because it was up at around the 60 psi. I guess I'd feel a little bit better if it was around the 50-55 mark. We'll see. So I'm just going to put the ignition on now and see. Okay, well, encouragingly, my fuel pressure now on my high pressure fuel rail went up to 50. So I'm going to be trying to kick it over now on a what I think is a slightly lower fuel pressure on the high pressure fuel rail, and we'll see if that makes a difference. So we'll give it a go. I'm actually going to record the diagnostics on my phone. So currently I'm showing my coolant water temperature to be 21, 12 volts, 12.1 volts on my voltage system. So we'll crank it over and see what she does. Hopefully I've dried the plugs enough that it'll fire. Just got to put the water on in the hope that she starts and keeps running. Okay, here we go. I just don't know what to say. She started, seemed to run a little bit better than before. My high pressure fuel was around the 40 to 50, so I am running a lower pressure with that different fuel pressure regulator on there. But again, she only ran a bit, stalled. I better pull the plugs again now. They'll be wet and blacked up. I'm really struggling to understand why she's being given too much fuel. Okay, so what we've just seen is I'm not really moving forward. I've now checked all the fuel injectors, I've calibrated them, I've cleaned them, I've checked the ignition system, I've checked the pulses to the fuel injectors, I've changed the map sensor, I've changed the throttle position sensor, I've changed the idle air control valve. So I've done all these things. The one thing that I haven't really put the concentration on, and a common theme tends to be now these spark plugs. When I pull the spark plugs, they're black and wet. I dry them out, clean them up, put them back, and as you've just seen, the engine will start, but it will choke itself again after a few seconds of running. So I'm now going to focus on these spark plugs. These spark plugs were fitted as new spark plugs during this 2-year period that the marine engineers had this boat and been changing all sorts of things trying to get this boat to run properly. So I'm going to focus now on the spark plugs and see what I find.